Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 545 for the 31st of March 2019. Richard Saunders here with you from the San Francisco Bay Area. And what a pleasure it is to be here in the Bay Area, because I've been meeting up with the local skeptics. In fact, later on in the show, a report from Millbrae Skeptics in the Pub. Now, I know you're used to hearing Maynard or Trish Han, our reporters at Sydney Skeptics in the Pub. Well, this week I went to Millbrae Skeptics in the Pub. Millbrae is south of San Francisco, and I met up with some of the locals there, had a nice pint of Guinness, and asked the big question, should you argue with somebody who is wrong on the internet? And a big shout out and a big thank you to my friend Greg Dorais, who kindly invited me to Millbrae Skeptics in the Pub and even took me back to where I'm staying afterwards in his wonderful electric car. Now, I swear this car must be from the future, because it seems to have a drone that flies above it, and when you press a button you can see an aerial shot of your car or something like that. I don't know, it's too sciencey for me. Anyway, what a great night I had at Millbrae Skeptics in the Pub, coming up later on in the show. Also here in the area, I was lucky enough to attend a talk by Dr Eugenie Scott. What would Darwin think of today's creationists? And before the talk, Jeannie and I spent some time chatting about this very issue. That's coming up right at the top of the show. After that, a report about measles outbreaks around the world. A very concerning story, not only here in the Bay Area, but also in New York and, in quite a few pockets around the world, measles is rearing its ugly head. I wonder why. And then to round off the show later on, we have another report from the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics. This one, we go back quite a few years, well over 30 years, to look at an article about psychic detectives, so-called. Stay tuned at the end of the show for more messages from me, but now it's time for me to run upstairs, make myself a nice root beer float. While I'm doing that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. On Saturday, the 24th of May, 2019, I accompanied Dr. Eugenie Scott, and we drove down to Palo Alto, which is south of San Francisco, to a meetup organized by the Atheist Abbey, a local group. Our host was Jan Altman, and Dr. Eugenie Scott was there to talk about what would Darwin say to today's creationists. Of course, Dr. Eugenie Scott needs no introduction to listeners of the Skeptic Zone. However, she is a former executive director of the National Center for Science Education, also an internationally known expert on controversy between creationism and evolution, and an acclaimed scientist in her own right. She is often called upon by the press and other media to explain science to the general public. And incidentally, she's a great beekeeper. I caught up with Dr. Eugenie Scott just before her talk. You're supposed to see, it's a sculpture. We're here in Palo Alto at the library. I'm with Dr. Eugenie Scott, and we're just wandering around the garden now because we're here to... you're giving a talk today.
I am giving a talk, yes.
And it's about what Darwin would say now, or something to this effect. I wonder what he would say.
It's a talk that I have given many times for Darwin Day celebrations. I guess actually the first time I gave it was in 2009 in Chicago at a conference about Darwin. But I thought it would be fun to think about what would Darwin say to today's creationists.
Ah, right.
Because, of course, Darwin had creationists in the 1800s,
well, that's
but
not surprising.
they were very different from our creationists. But some of the stuff has remained the same. So I don't know how many times I've given this talk, but it's always a little bit different because, number one, I always like to do something a little different, but also because there's so many different things you can talk about. Certainly the demonization of Darwin was something that went on during his time.
It hasn't stopped, right?
I could do a whole hour or more on that alone. But there's also fun things to talk about, like Darwin's deathbed confession, which is a lot of fun. And I usually always talk about that just because if you've heard about it, it's fun to know the story behind it.
Okay.
If you haven't heard about it, it's kind of interesting that this urban legend became so widespread.
But this is a common theme. I mean, I've heard Carl Sagan had a deathbed confession. and any prominent skeptic or atheist or whatever it is, someone will say, oh, yes, but he had a deathbed confession.
Yeah, that seems to be a very rewarding idea for people.
It is.
When somebody has views that are very opposed to views that you hold very strongly, I'm sure it's very comforting to think that they kind of finally came around to your point of view. But in the case of Darwin, nope, that really didn't.
I often joke with my listeners about being plagued by aircraft. There's a jet flying overhead and I can hear it. I don't know what that is in the background. I think they follow me around the world, Jeannie. Whenever I'm recording, someone says, right, send the aircraft to him.
I'm sure that's a problem. Actually, I think you've got two aircraft.
I do,
one just went, but that's not the one we're hearing now.
No, it's getting louder. I think we're in trouble. I can't even see it. It's lost up in there in the clouds.
It must be behind that big cedar tree. Oh, there it is. It's a small aircraft.
Oh, I see it, yeah.
It's like a helicopter.
So getting back now, the aircraft is disappearing. This is an interesting notion to me because you're saying that the creationists now are somewhat different to the creationists Darwin had to deal with. I mean, if I gave it any thought, I would see that must be the case.
Yeah, but yes and no.
What, they evolved? Did they?
If nothing else evolves, creationism evolves, believes me. But just like all evolution, it's on a pattern. And the argument from design, as an example, we have here in the 20th and 21st centuries, the intelligent design creationists, who are really just an intensification of ideas from their ancestral creation science proponents who are Young Earth Creationists, and they are descendants of those from the 1800s that Darwin was dealing with. But the basic idea of design is an extremely attractive one to people. It when you look at nature seems so complex. It just seems common sense that this couldn't have come about by chance. And of course,
it didn't.
No evolutionist ever said that it came about by chance. Yeah. But not the complexity of that redwood tree that we're standing next to is.
Oh yeah.
It's not an either-or thing. It's not that is just a matter of random chance that all of those cells develop to process light into energy through photosynthesis and deposit the proteins that form the bark and the leaves and the trees and all this incredible complexity that makes a 200 tall foot tree. That doesn't have to be a matter of components bumping together and forming by chance, or God poofed it into existence. There is a natural process called natural selection that can produce design, and usually that's something I talk about in this lecture as well.
Yeah, and I guess I'm a little surprised because once you get the hang of natural selection, it's not that complex, is it? I mean, it's not a really hard thing to get your head around how it works.
The basic idea, no. The basic idea makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
When when I'm talking to people who have a little bit of science background, I'm not afraid to use big words. I like to describe natural selection as adaptive differential reproduction. And it's reproduction because what we're talking about is stuff through time, things that get passed on from generation to generation. And reproduction is that concept. Differential reproduction refers to the fact that not everything in one generation gets passed on to the next generation. Some organisms never reproduce at all, some reproduce more than others. There's a differential of reproduction. But the differential reproduction is the result of adaptive qualities. So adaptive differential reproduction really is the key to understanding natural selection. And when we say natural selection is adaptive, we're saying that the characteristics within a population that tend within that environment, which is critical, within that environment to make individuals survive longer, reproduce more, those are adaptive for that environment and are therefore passed on differentially. So over time, because reproduction occurs, because adaptation takes place. Everybody can see that. Creationists agree that adaptation takes place. And if you give it enough time, the logical result of that is adaptive differential reproduction, evolution by natural selection.
Yeah. Again, once you sit down and explain to you and you consider it, it falls into place and it does make sense. And what you say about time is very interesting, because I fear, and I think, and you probably would know more than me, that since we are woefully inadequate to grasp time scales,
it's so hard. It's so hard.
We can't. I mean, you were talking about the process taking millions of years. Well, we have trouble coping with tens of years,
Hey, I was making some modifications to this talk yesterday, and I realized that I'm the same age Darwin was when he died. So time creeps up on us, and he was kind of old and sick and feeble, and I'm not yet.
That's an interesting. It reminds me of the old Tom Lehrer joke when. What was it? When Mozart was my age, he'd been dead for 10 years or something.
Right. Yeah, if I was Darwin, I'd be dead.
All right, well, I think you're getting the call. We better walk into the library now. I think they're setting up the room. And I'm really looking forward to this talk by Dr. Eugenie Scott. Needless to say, Dr. Eugenie Scott gave a wonderful talk lasting over an hour. What would Darwin say to today's creationists? She covered many, many topics from Darwin's voyage to all his publications. It was fascinating to hear about Darwin's alleged deathbed confession, how Darwin would be surprised at the young Earth creationism, the new kinds of creationism all around the world from different cultures, and why he's been demonized since his death. If you have a chance to see Dr. Eugenie's talk, I sincerely recommend it. Thank you, Jeannie. Here's a message from our friends at the Millbrae Skeptics, just south of Melbourne. 2nd of April, Millbrae Skeptics Meetup, a skeptical journey through my career in water, sanitation and hygiene by Catherine Harries. Catherine will talk about the criticality of water, sanitation and hygiene, WASH, WASH, in third world countries. Catherine has worked for over 20 years in the area of water, sanitation and hygiene, including over 12 years working in India, Somalia, Timor-Leste, Philippines, Sri Lanka and across the Pacific. She has predominantly worked for UNICEF, but has also worked for Red Cross, Red R Australia and the Australian Government's Global WASH Fund. She moved to Melbourne 2 years ago and is a member of Victorian Skeptics. Now this will be 7:30 p.m. at the Millbrae Sporting Club, which is in Millbrae, Victoria. For more information, just follow the link in this week's show notes. Some years ago, the Skeptic Zone reported on a book called Melanie's Marvelous Measles by author Stephanie Messenger. This book was published in 2012. The book, a children's book, is about a little girl called Melanie who contracts measles and is happy as a clam, and the cover of the book has her with her measles dancing in the garden with a butterfly. It basically encourages parents to give their children preventable diseases. One reviewer writes, author Stephanie Messenger is learning the hard way. Her 2012 children's book, Melanie's Marvelous Measles, is getting renewed attention thanks to a recent deadly outbreak of measles in Disneyland in December. There have been more than 100 confirmed cases of the contagious virus across a dozen states. That comes from 2015. Now in 2019, we have the unbelievable situation where, according to USA Today and many other outlets, New York County declares state of emergency for measles, bans unvaccinated minors from public places. The report says, citing pockets of resistance that are impeding the county's efforts to stem a measles outbreak that has risen to 153 cases since October, Rockland officials today declared a state of emergency. Starting at midnight, anyone who's under 18 and not vaccinated against measles will be banned from public places. This ban will last until the declaration expires in 30 days or until people are vaccinated. Places covered under the ban include shopping centres, restaurants, schools and places of worship. Outdoor gathering places are not included. The report goes on, the original measles cases in New York and New Jersey in October came from travellers visiting from or travelling home from Israel, which is experiencing a measles outbreak that has affected more than 3,400 people and has caused at least 2 deaths. Measles has been eliminated in the United States due to high vaccination rates, but pockets of measles outbreaks can break out in or under-vaccinated areas due to travellers bringing in measles from outside the US, officials said. And closer to where I am at the moment, in the San Francisco area, and we quote briefly from the website of KPX5, CBS San Francisco Bay Area, traveller may have exposed thousands to measles in Santa Clara County. And here is a brief clip from the TV news.
That measles scare in the South Bay. For 7 days, an infected tourist exposed thousands to the virus before he was finally hospitalized. He visited 20 popular locations,
including the Apple Visitor Center in Cupertino, the Hoover Tower Observation Deck at Stanford, and the Valley Fair Mall, where Night Beat's Maria Medina is tonight. Maria?
Yeah, and he also visited restaurants and grocery stores during his stay here. The good news, if you've been vaccinated, you should be okay, but many aren't.
It is concerning. It's concerning to everybody.
Eurydice Chapindo's worked as a nurse practitioner for nearly 2 decades. We caught her outside the Great Mall.
You just don't know who they were in contact with.
Where Santa Clara County leaders say a man with the measles who'd flown in from a different country made a stop while in the South Bay.
Measles is one of the most contagious infectious diseases.
The man kept a busy schedule during his stay. On Saturday, March 16th, he went to this IHOP in San Jose.
They should have, at least on the window, at least on the front window, or a sign that says that there was measles present.
It was just one of 20 very crowded places the man visited within a week. From the restaurant, he went to the Apple Visitor Center, Stanford's Hoover Tower, and Valley Fair Mall. March 18th, El Fornillo in Santa Clara. March 19th, the Great Mall in Milpitas. Doctors say someone can catch the measles even an hour after the infected person leaves the room.
It's up to 90% of susceptible people will get the measles if they're exposed, which is extremely high.
Those include people who aren't vaccinated, including babies waiting to get the shots and anyone with a weakened immune system. In Santa Clara County, 96.7% of kindergartners last year were vaccinated for the measles. Eurydice is around the sick all the time. She says she protects herself as much as she can.
I'm vaccinated, and I'm hoping that everyone vaccinates their kids and themselves, and that's all you can hope for.
And the doctor says it is never too late to be vaccinated. By the way, health officials did not say where the tourist was from. Live in the Night Beat, I'm Maria Medina.
We have posted the full list of locations that this person visited, along with the specific dates and times they were there, at kpix.com.
And that audio courtesy of kpix.com, and you can visit that website to find out more. And of course, it's not just Israel and the United States that are suffering from measles outbreaks at the moment. A report from closer to home, closer to Australia and New Zealand, from stuff.co.nz we read, passengers on a flight from Melbourne to Christchurch exposed to measles. The story goes on to say a passenger who flew into Christchurch from Australia had the measles, adding to the regional outbreak of more than 35 cases. The person, who was infectious, arrived in Melbourne on a Virgin Australia flight, the A99, on March 19, landing at 11:35 p.m. The Canterbury District Health Board, CDHB, has urged anyone on the flight unsure about their immunisation status to check with their doctor and to stay home and remain isolated until the 3rd of April if they are not fully vaccinated. We also have reports about warnings about measles from the Australian Formula One Grand Prix. Yet another report from a couple of weeks ago, New South Wales Health issues warnings after tourist brings measles from Bali visits Sydney Opera House. And this comes from news.com.au. Aussies who holiday in Bali and visitors to the Sydney Opera House are among hundreds urged to look out for measles symptoms after a young woman and baby contracted the disease. The two new cases take the number of people infectious with the highly contagious disease in the state since Christmas to 19, New South Wales Health said yesterday. Now, just to bring home how important this story is, the World Health Organization in 2011 estimated that 158,000 deaths were caused by measles. As of 2018, measles remains a leading cause of vaccine-preventable deaths in the world. So this is a far cry from what people like Stephanie Messenger would have us believe, that measles is a wonderful gift from nature and your children can happily contract it and go dancing in the garden with butterflies. Another book by Stephanie Messenger is Sarah Visits a Naturopath. And from her own website, Sarah Visits a Naturopath, a children's storybook written by Stephanie Messenger. This book exposes children aged 4 to 10 to the idea that they create most of their ill health by the choices they make. It encourages them to listen to the messages their body gives them. Sarah visits a naturopath to get advice on staying well according to nature's laws. Well, Stephanie, according to nature's laws, a lot of children would simply die of vaccine-preventable diseases.
I gotta say, Bigfoot's BS, but the chupacabra is totally the result of top-secret government genetic experiments on a remote island.
Taking medical advice from Gwyneth Paltrow, like steaming your lady parts and putting jade eggs all up in there, is a great way to improve your health.
Police from around the world regularly use psychics to solve crimes. They just don't talk about it.
Spontaneous human combustion is for sure a real thing. I've read all about it on the internet, and I worry someday it's going to happen to me.
We all have friends and family who believe these things and much more. Well, if you're a rational thinker who is tired of arguing on social media and never getting anywhere, we have a solution for you.
Join the Guerrilla Skepticism and Wikipedia team, and we will teach you how to add reliable scientific and skeptical information to the world's #1 source of information, Wikipedia.
We write new articles and improve existing ones. We remove pseudoscience, paranormal, and alt-med claims, substituting the actual facts. And we operate in many languages.
We've already reached tens of millions of people searching for information, but as you can imagine, we can never do enough.
So please, join us. All you need is a PC, a Facebook account, and a desire to help educate the planet. In fact, you'll be educating the world while you sleep.
Contact us at gsowteam@gmail.com. Guerrilla Skepticism. The time is now.
Music by PurplePlanet.com.
It's iPhone without the phone.
Without the phone.
Yeah.
I see. See what I did there? Where? We're at Millbrae, and we're at Skeptics in the pub. At an Irish pub, we have a private room all to ourselves, which is really good. I like that. We had the music turned off, which I like even better. And I'll just quick introductions. Who do we have here?
Greg Dorais.
And you are?
I am a former board member for Bay Area Skeptics. I'm now on the advisory committee for Bay Area Skeptics.
Okay, and
I'm Steve Kosowski, and I'm just here off the street just for the beer.
Half the people here like that.
I'm Leonard Tramiel, and I'm actually on the board of the Center for Inquiry.
Oh, I'm in august company here. So this is the Millbrae Skeptics in the pub. How long has this been going?
I started coming here in 2010, I believe. I believe it started in 2009, so close to 10 years.
Okay, and has it always been here in this pub?
Yeah, in this room, which they've remodeled a couple times since we started coming here. But yes, always at this pub, Fiddler's Green in Millbrae, a genuine Irish pub.
Run by genuine Irish people, because the guy who came into service wanted to give me my Guinness.
Had quite a strong Irish accent.
He certainly did sound Irish to me. And it's a nice little turn up. It's a cozy room here. And for those folks listening around the world, can you describe where Millbrae is exactly?
So Millbrae is about 20 minutes south of San Francisco.
Depending on how you
get there, yes.
It's right next to the airport.
It's next to the airport, yeah.
Across Highway 101 from the airport, from San Francisco Airport, which puts us about a half hour north of Silicon Valley.
Yes, yeah. I'm sure everybody's heard of Silicon Valley. And you were just telling us before you have an interesting history, and one which involves me in a strange sort of way, because my very first computer I bought in high school was a Commodore 64, and you have some sort of passing familiarity with this computer.
Yeah, you might say that. So my father founded Commodore, the company that made the Commodore 64, and I actually worked on the predecessor to its predecessor, the original Commodore PET. That was fun.
That was this guy and I are linked way back in history. Yes, that was my first computer. I learnt BASIC on other computers, but then I learnt BASIC on the Commodore 64, and the rest is history. And the younger audience are going, huh? What? Huh?
I continue to be amazed at how many people have heard of Commodore 64s, even the young folk. Usually it's because they saw one in the attic somewhere that their parents used, but when you sell 30 million of them...
that means there must be a lot of them still around and still functioning.
Presumably there are. I know that there are an awful lot of people that use them as hobbyist machines. There are still people writing software for the Commodore 64 and selling games, wow, which just shocks me.
Wow.
So I actually had lunch last week with a magazine editor from Poland who wanted to interview me because of my association with Commodore. It's really, really quite remarkable.
Well, it was a remarkable machine. It played great games. It was a wonderful not gaming machine or machine for games or whatever it was. It was fantastic. Well, we're just waiting for our various dinners to arrive. And while we have our dinner, we can all think about what the question should be. Because whenever I go to Skeptics in the pub, I like to ask pubbers a skeptical question. Oh, here comes some food at the moment. We'll give it some thought and we'll come back.
Cognitive dissonance.
Now, Greg, you're the man. You came up with tonight's question, and tonight's question is: should you really argue with somebody who is wrong on the internet? Do you do this?
I have. I think there's value not necessarily in making the attempt of changing the mind of the person that you're directly arguing with, because sometimes that could be near impossible. But there's value in presenting a solid argument to those who may be reading and watching this particular comment thread. And maybe you're going to be educating a fence sitter, somebody who hasn't made up their mind.
So like in a Facebook thread or something like that?
Sure, yeah. And I think it's important in the context of something like this to really make an effort to argue with truth and clarity, and use all those skeptical, critical thinking tools that you've got in your toolkit, so that you're not feeding them with ammunition because you're making errors, and you're also presenting your argument well.
But where do you draw the line? Where do you say, okay, that's enough?
Probably when you realize that the other person is a troll, is essentially just trying to counter everything you're saying with some other argument, whether or not that argument is sensible or nonsense. I've been in some conversations like that, and at one point just realized this is going nowhere. They're simply trying to one-up me in their response, no matter whether or not their response is accurate. And at that point, I'll give up. But hopefully along the way, I've made some solid comments that will help other people who are watching and reading this thread.
All right. Good answer. All right. Here's the next sucker. So, do you think you should tell people when they're wrong on the internet?
Absolutely.
Good answer. Short and sweet.
This is Leonard you're talking to.
This is Leonard. You haven't indulged yourself in this, I take it.
Not in the last 5 minutes. But that's only because I've been listening to you interview Greg.
I see, right. So as soon as you go home, you're going to get into it again.
Well, if there's a lull in the conversation here, I may pull out my phone and do it.
And we walk around here. So do you think you should tell people if they're wrong on the internet, or do you engage in this?
Mostly yes, but usually it depends is the easy answer. But generally speaking, I prefer to ask people questions when they're wrong on the internet.
Okay.
So if someone's...
The Socratic method?
The Socratic, or street epistemology, plug street epistemology.
Okay.
So if somebody... It depends on the situation, of course, but if somebody's really wrong and you have no chance... you just say they're wrong and get out quick if you want to save time. But if you really want... If there's people listening and you really want to bring out the flaws in their thinking and why they think what they think, maybe as opposed to the actual facts, because the whole backfire effect and all that. I think asking them questions about why they believe this wrong thing might be more productive in the long run.
Yes, good reply. I'll come down to this end of the table, deep in conversation. Now, do you believe in arguing with people if they're wrong on the internet?
Don't get your hopes up, but yes.
Well, you've had success in this?
I'm not going to say I've had success, but if you can get someone to think, you can never make. I think hoping that you're going to make a turnaround on your efforts alone is not folly, but you're getting your hopes too high. But if you can plant the seed of doubt and somebody else later on, and so it's an incremental thing that you have to work with people, and to try and get it. My arguing alone, it was sort of like any politician agreed with me 100%. There's a problem,
right?
And the same thing with trying to convince somebody that they're wrong. Is my word alone should not be enough for that. It should be a cumulative thing. They should be respecting and hearing from a lot of different sources to make that count.
It's a very interesting answer, indeed. I'll come around to you.
I will sometimes look up things on Snopes as corrections to something they've posted. But if it's my relatives who are proudly uneducated, and I've known this about them my whole life in a certain part of the country, they will just respond with, oh, well, what do you know? Or one particular one will just say, oh, well, I just posted that because I knew you would think it was interesting. And they totally discount anything that I've given them. It depends on the individual, and I would say most of the time I just try to get out of the conversation and just because I don't find a whole lot of value to it. I understand his point of view that it's incremental. People only change incrementally. You're not going to totally change somebody from no to yes. So he is right. He's just more patient than I am, I think. Yes. I used to teach, and I did not enjoy teaching.
Oh, wow, okay. Because there's that thing when somebody will say something outrageous, and it's like what do we call it? An earworm? Something burrowing into your head, saying, exactly. "No, I have to tell them they're wrong. Look, you're wrong." You know.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. There's the urge to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, like I said, looking it up on a site that is reputable, and sending them that information. But I know the people I'm dealing with aren't probably going to read it. They're the same ones who used to contact me. Oh, ask Cousin Sandy. She has the information you need on the family research because she likes to read. She's been like that since she was a kid. So that's sort of a thing, They've always been this way, these particular people that I think of. But
well, yeah, I think you've got more restraint than I do.
When it's family, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Very good point.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Now we'll just come back here because you're saying you have was it a weekly newsletter?
Yeah. And so it's called the Science Schmooze, and we list public informal science presentations all over the Bay Area. And then we do an editorial with it that goes out each week as well. And the Bay Area is such a wealth of information for it. It's mind-boggling. And so right now we're listing about 100 events for every 2-week period.
Okay.
And so, but when I do an editorial and go after the anti-vaccination crowd, every time I get one flaming email.
Wow.
And it's interesting because it's only one. It's never the same person. It's always slightly different. But it is a hot button in so many ways for us and stuff. And so the other guys that write, who I think David Allman Smith, who's not here, he writes for it as well. And so he can do it and he never gets anything. But I write and I get slammed. And it's just like, you're a pawn of big pharma.
Right, of course.
And you have no right to call yourself a scientist, which I am not a scientist, and I point that out. But it's interesting that the anti-vaccination issues raise so much, emotion.
They do.
It really is a mind-boggling thing. I had some people. There's a homeschooling group down near Santa Cruz, and two of the mothers there are being confronted by everybody else in the homeschooling group who are anti-vaxxers, and these two women are saying, we need help. How do we make these arguments and stuff? And so I've engaged with Eugenie Scott on getting her some input and stuff on it as well. So, but yeah.
An interesting story. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, now how can people find out more about Millbrae Skeptics in the pub?
You can find the Bay Area Skeptics Facebook group on Facebook.
Yep.
Go to baskeptics.org, where we have an events list on the page. This particular Skeptics in the Pub meetup is the fourth Wednesday of every month at this location, Fiddler's Green in Millbrae, and the second Thursday of every month in Berkeley at the La Peña Cultural Center. There is a Skep Talk, which is a presentation by some notable skeptic or scientist about a topic related to skepticism or science. You should know this because you were at the last one. You spoke.
I spoke, yes.
That happens every month. And then in the summer, it'll be in June this year, is Skeptical. Yeah, and you can find that at skepticalcon.com. You find out all the information and buy tickets. That's a one-day-long skeptic conference that runs about 10 hours or so with 5, 6, 7 very interesting speakers.
Yep, yeah, I was there last year, had a wonderful time. And folks, I can recommend Millbrae Skeptics in the pub. We got a private room, the food was great, my goodness me. I thought I ordered a small amount of spicy chicken wings. I could barely get through them. I tell you what.
Bay Area science.
Is it America?
Oh, this is America, that's right.
The Sci Schmooze.
Yes.
Look up the Sci Schmooze on Google. That's Herb Masters, BayAreaScience.org. Herb Masters is heavily involved with it. Herb is one of the other board of directors members for Bay Area Skeptics, and that's a great resource for what's currently going on in science.
Okay, folks, again, links will be in this week's show notes. Well, we'll wrap it up from Millbrae Skeptics in the pub. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hello, listeners of Maximum Fun. I want to tell you about our newest podcast that tells you all about the truth of the flat Earth.
Have you been looking out over the horizon and you've been thinking, wait a minute, this doesn't look round. I've been lied to my whole life.
What is NASA doing with $52 million a day?
Come on. We explode the myths.
Just kidding. We're Oh No, Ross and Carrie, and we investigate extraordinary claims.
That's right. We investigate extraordinary claims firsthand. We go undercover in fringe groups. We get alternative medicine treatments. And we hang out with people who have unusual beliefs, like flat earthers, 9/11 truthers.
We do ghost investigations. We've joined Scientology, and we got baptized in the Mormon Church.
If it goes bump in the night, then so do we. Why don't you check out Oh No, Ross and Carrie at MaximumFun.org.
Now we continue our current series of reports, items, articles, items of interest from the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics, and we turn to Volume 7, Number 3, Spring 1987. A story that's close to my heart, Psychics and the Police, Separating Fact from Fiction. Now, I don't see a byline, so I suspect this was written by Barry Williams, the then editor of the Skeptic magazine. Many self-professed psychics claim to have assisted the police by providing insights into the whereabouts of missing persons, finding evidence, etc. The newspaper headline, quote, "Psychic helps in hunt for woman," end quote, is commonplace, but rarely do we hear of any follow-up on how useful the psychic's advice has been to police. The newspaper heading above, in fact, appeared in a Sydney newspaper recently concerning the disappearance of a girl who had failed to turn up for an appointment with her, quote, "psychic healer," end quote. The healer, naturally upset at her non-appearance, volunteered his help to the police. The paper said he had contacted other psychic mediums throughout Australia in a bid to find her. The paper did not say how the healer contacted the other mediums. Media? Surely nothing as mundane as a telephone. As it turned out, the young lady in question turned up safe and sound, having had a mechanical breakdown on a trip to the snow. But the memory left in most readers' minds is that a psychic helped police with their investigations, so psychics must be valid investigators. Many skeptical investigations of, quote, "psychic detectives," end quote, have shown their claims to be unfounded. Famous names such as Gerard Cosset and Doris Stokes spring to mind, and now the colossal Mrs. Dankbar has thrown her hat into the ring by claiming to have assisted Dutch authorities, although her claims have not been substantiated one way or the other due to lack of detailed information for a follow-up. In fact, police may use psychics' advice on occasion, much as they would use anyone's information, especially if there are no strong leads. But the police use of psychics is not always as enthusiastic as the psychics or the newspapers would lead one to believe. The heading, Clairvoyants in Search for Missing Boy, which appeared in the Sunday Telegraph on June 30, 1986, elicited the response from the police that their investigations are being hampered by people claiming to be clairvoyants and psychics. The chief superintendent said at the time, "We give no credibility at all to these people and we don't use them in our investigations." More recently, the South Australian Skeptics has been in contact with the Commissioner of Police in South Australia. Instigated by another state's police use of psychic advice to find, or not to find, as it turned out, a missing person's car, South Australia State Secretary, and from this it means the State Secretary of the Australian Skeptics in South Australia, Ron Evans, wrote to the South Australian Commissioner. Most senior policemen would no doubt ignore messages from the teacup. However, it concerns us that left unguided, an officer, perhaps lacking in experience or confidence, might feel the need to pursue even the most preposterous lead for fear of criticism if he did not. There are quite frequent reports in the popular press of some psychic or other having assisted police in an investigation. The reports seldom mention which police force or which crime or what exactly the psychic achieved. We have tried to follow up with some of these vague reports, but we have yet to find even one instance where a psychic has actually helped the police. Even so, the illusion persists with the public that, from time to time, the police are in fact assisted by psychics. We are concerned that even some police may have this illusion. Mr. Evans went on to ask a number of questions of the Commissioner. Is there any police policy on the use of psychics and clairvoyance? If so, what is it? What contact has the South Australian Police had with psychics? And importantly, is there any documented instance where a psychic has materially assisted the police? In response, from Assistant Commissioner Crime KPE Harvey, the South Australian Skeptics learned that there was no specific policy on the use of psychics. All evidence received is assessed, evaluated and acted upon according to the circumstances of the case. However, numerous individuals describing themselves as psychics have contacted investigators during major criminal inquiries. None of these contacts have resulted in bringing a case to a successful conclusion so far as we can trace through documentation. The Australian Skeptics are keen to learn of any investigation which has involved, quote, assistance, end quote, from psychics, especially any in which a psychic played an important and useful role. Separating claims from fact is an important role for skeptics, and any assistance our readers could give in this matter would be most useful. And that comes from the Skeptic Magazine, Volume 7, Number 3, from spring 1987. And again, I believe that piece was written by the then editor and president of the Skeptics, Barry Williams, the late Barry Williams. And I find this report particularly interesting because I do a talk myself about so-called psychic detectives, including Gerard Cosset, who is, you may recall, the psychic who was the psychic involved in looking for the missing Beaumont children way back in the 1960s. And just a reminder, when I use the word psychic, it's a shortcut. It's simply quicker than saying alleged psychic or so-called psychic or self-described psychic or something like that. And once again, you can read that and thousands of reports, articles, interviews, items, reviews, book reviews, and on it goes in the pages of the Skeptic Magazine for free at your disposal by visiting www.skeptics.com.au. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, if you're going to be in Sydney, Australia on Thursday the 4th of April, it's Sydney Skeptics in the Pub at the Occidental Hotel, which is just near Wynyard Station in downtown Sydney. The upcoming talk is by Kerry Doherty, and it's about Australia's role in the Apollo lunar program. And the blurb says, "The Dish is a delightful Aussie film about Australia's role in the Apollo 11 lunar landing. However, while it is based on a true story, we have to remember that it is only a movie. Its focus on the crucial role played by the Parkes radio telescope in bringing the live television broadcast of the Apollo 11 lunar landings to the world leaves untold the much larger role in the Apollo program played by space tracking facilities in Australia." Join space historian Kerry Doherty as she delves, I like that word, delves into the larger story behind The Dish to find the answers. Now that does sound like a great night. Again, that's Skeptics in the Pub in Sydney, and that will be on the 4th of April, Thursday the 4th of April, kicking off around 6 p.m. And for more information or to register your attending, just visit the links in this week's show notes or look up Sydney Skeptics in Meetup. A big thank you to those people who kindly contribute to the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal at skepticzone.tv. Your contribution, weekly, monthly, yearly, not yearly, weekly, monthly, or even one-off, means the Skeptic Zone can keep in production. Coming up on next week's show, I hope to bring you an interview with another staff member of the fabulous Center for Science Education in Oakland, California. And oddly enough, next week's program will come out when I'm lost in the time zones between today and the day after tomorrow. I'll be flying, and I miss a day. I think I miss, I will miss Sunday, the day in Australia the Skeptic Zone normally comes out. I won't have a Sunday next week because of time zones and flying. I think I better start watching more Twilight Zone. But for this week, I think, this is Richard Saunders signing off from the San Francisco Bay Area. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.